All right. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour. I know Ryan Chapman just messaged me. He's going to be on here in just a few minutes. He had a computer issue, so he's rebooting his machine, but no worries. He's always an entertaining person to chat with. Matter of fact, like our history with Ryan goes back quite some ways. For anyone not familiar with our guest today, Ryan Chapman, he's a lot of things. He's a practitioner. He's been in the trenches for quite some time. History back with Cylance, back when it was acquired by BlackBerry. So he was part of the BlackBerry Cylance team doing threat hunting, incident response, all that kind of good stuff. And funny enough, while he was part of that team, for anybody familiar with the CTF that Whitney and I built some years back called OpenSock, the year that, when that CTF started to take off in popularity, we kind of became a pretty big deal at DEF CON. I remember Ryan Chapman showed up with his Cylance team. Hey Ryan, I see you there. Ryan showed up with his Cylance team and completely crushed that competition one year. Actually, it was probably 2 years. I think you guys came and did that to us. Yeah, 2 years. And we've been in touch with him ever since. Obviously, he was building a pretty impressive team. Ryan has since moved on to Palo Alto Networks, where he's heading up. I believe it's threat hunting over there. Ryan, is that right?
Yep, that's it.
Outstanding. And he's done some other really cool things in the space. He's the chair of the SANS Ransomware Summit. I want to say also an author of a ransomware course there with SANS. So he's definitely got some experience and some really cool stories from the trenches. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us here today on Defender Fridays. For those of you that might be new to the show, so the idea here is bringing together like-minded individuals working in the information security space, whether you're a defender or, on the offense side or somewhere in the middle, maybe some purple team action, or we even GRC, risk compliance, that kind of stuff. It really doesn't matter because at the end of the day, all this stuff is related, intertwined. And so we bring together folks that have real world experience in the field doing this kind of stuff to share their insights, their experiences, and their stories, hoping that we can kind of collectively level up the skills of everyone involved, right? So thanks for joining us, Ryan. Super stoked to have you on today. I remember you kind of kept us on the edge of our seat, wondering what kind of topic you were going to bring to the show today. So what's on your mind, sir?
Threat hunting, and I apologize for being on a phone right now. I decided, just do this on my work computer, and then my work computer decided I'm going to reboot and update. I'm like, that's wonderful timing. So I'd love to talk just general threat hunting, and I have a couple of tips and tricks that I'd like to share with everyone.
Sweet. Always a welcome topic.
So, first and foremost, what I wanted to ask was if I can get, I don't know, something in the chat or in any way, shape, or form, audience feedback on if you're actually hunting. And for that matter, if you're hunting, if you're doing it in a personal way, or if you're also doing it with in a coordinated fashion. So let's see, I think this was 3 jobs ago now, we used to do threat hunting sessions. And so what we would do is we would have a war room, just like we would engage in our large scale IRs. And we would have our entire team, our SOC, our CERT. And at the time, when I was working for a company called Bechtel, is a very large organization, they would come in and it would just be this massive group of people. It would be like 20 people plus in a room. And we would just talk about threat hunting. And we would basically choose something to look at and then kind of go from there. And so I'm wondering, I'm not sure if on my phone if I can see it very well, but here's the chat. There it is. So I'm wondering if anyone happens to have any experience with setting up either these types of sessions or, anything where you're actively threat hunting and you're pushing the envelope, if you will, with doing things on a consistent basis. Because threat hunting is not something that you just do one time. It's not something you do 2 or 3 times. It's something that needs to be a continual process. And that's what I'm really looking to see if anyone has experience with setting up some type of ongoing hunting sessions or something like that, because that's really what I highly recommend. It's something that makes me extremely excited and happy when folks do it. And I find that a lot of times they just don't. So I'm wondering, I don't see any chat coming up now. Folks are being quiet right now. What are you doing?
Yeah, I'll definitely share my experience, my perspective. But yeah, I would love to hear from anyone else in the chat. And just a quick reminder, so for the chat, it's kind of funny, folks. When you first fire away a message in the chat, just make sure you select that you want to send it to everyone, because the default will only send it to hosts and panelists, which is kind of lame, but it's just a Zoom issue. But yeah, so from my perspective, Ryan, I've done both. But I'll share one bit of lesson that I learned from my military days doing this, is that it was always a session. It was always a session like you described at Bechtel, right? Like nobody kind of just went off rogue and started threat hunting. There was always kind of a bigger picture sort of mission. Like, what is it we're hunting for and why? Well, is it based on a perceived threat? Is it based on some fresh threat intel? And then we put together a plan before a single keystroke is made on a keyboard. We put together a plan of how we're going to approach it, right? And assess the data sources that we even have access to, assess the endpoint interrogation capabilities that we have or don't have, right? And so like there's really a lot of planning that goes into it, which I'll admit was frustrating at times, because sometimes as a practitioner, you're just like, can we just stop talking and just go do this? But you over time you start to learn the importance of that brainstorming activity, because when you just dive in, you're making assumptions about what you're going to be able to, what questions you're even going to be able to ask and find answers to, right? And so I really do enjoy the kind of the war room session that you kind of described. But I find that that's a luxury that not many organizations have, and it might be just simply based on how many people that they have available for these activities, right? If you've only got one or two people, and in my experience, what I've seen in smaller security teams is there is no dedicated threat hunter, right? It's like it's an analyst that's part-timing as a threat hunter. So maybe they have like a weekly cadence or tempo, and that analyst will split their time and say, okay, I'm going to run a threat hunt this week for XYZ behavior. There's no brainstorming. It's really just that one analyst doing their thing, and that's the best that they can do. But yeah, I'm curious if others have similar experience and have seen pros and cons of either approach.
Like we have finance stuff coming in from our platforms, but it's very rudimentary, right? We're taking those IOCs and seeing if we see it in our traffic. Um, Occasionally we would look for some techniques, and that's essentially it.
So primarily IOC searches, and then occasionally venturing off into techniques, right? So that's a good insight, Newman. And I'm curious, Ryan, like where do you draw the line? Like where do you kind of clearly define like what is a threat hunt versus like what's just a retroactive like IOC sweep, and like does it matter?
That's the thing, is you take IOCs out of the equation. I properly got on my computer, right? I definitely apologize for that. I told myself, use your work computer, it'll be fine. That was a bad idea. So I have some examples kind of queued up for folks to comment on, and just to maybe if you've not heard of these methods, and great. So threat hunting, where you're looking through an article and we have IOCs, file-based, network-based, and you're like, oh, there's an IP address and a port. Like, okay, that's cool. That's just, to me, this is more scouring your environment to see if you've identified something that might be like, oh, that's known, a row. But rather, threat hunting to me is doing things like the first one that I have set up here is stacking, as we call it in the SANS world, as stacking, but also known as least frequency occurrence. And first off, in order to hunt properly, you have to have your data aggregated in some way, shape, or form. So you have to have some type of tip, or you have to have some type of SIM or log aggregator where you have all your disparate data in one location, right? So the idea of stacking is looking at, for example, like services. When you have a Windows service event log file, like 7045 is service installation, right? The event ID, by the way. And when you have those, there's a field in there called image path. And inside of image path, you have the path to the executable. So if you look throughout your organization and you simply look at, and whatever your system you're using, if you're using Splunk, it'll be something like, stats count by image path, service name, whatever your field names are, right? And then you'll do a sort right after that. And you'll do a sort by the least frequency. So ascending, if you will. And you'll look at, what you have. And sometimes we'll even do like a where, if you do a count by the image path, we'll do a where the image path is like less than 5.
And you'll just look for those image paths that are least frequently occurring within your environment. And when you start looking at those, you go like, wait a minute, why do these few hosts have these services with an image path that's not common within our environment? If we're going to deploy something, we're probably going to have a wide dispersal and that kind of thing. And so when a machine all of a sudden has this image path, especially when you see things like, C users public, music, farts.exe, because I'm a mature adult. And so when you see that, you're like, wait a minute, like, why is that there? Like, what's going on with that? And so that's how we in incident response, I say I worked in incident response for about 5 years, and then I moved to managed threat hunting. So that's what I do now is I threat hunt for a living, basically. But when you see these image paths that are extremely rare, it's very similar to if you look at tasks, right? And you're looking at the tasks and you're looking at the image path for the tasks themselves. Like, what are they actually going to execute, And you start going, well, wait a minute. Like, why is this thing executing on only 2 machines out of the entire environment? Or for that matter, 1 machine, which is kind of my favorite, to be honest. And when the count is less than 2, basically. And I find that a lot of organizations don't do that. And that even when they have their data aggregated, they're not looking for things that are outliers. And you can install something like a UBA, user behavior analysis, or end user behavior analysis, EUBA, as some folks call it now. Like my day job calls it that now. It's UBA. And they're not paying attention to the things that are rare in the environment. And some of those rarities are the things where you want to go, what are you doing? Like, boop. You want to just find out what the heck it's doing, why it's doing that, and why these particular executables exist in these silly paths, So that's one thing. If folks are not doing that, if you have the ability to do that, then I highly recommend that. You're stealing my thunder, Eric.
I'm just sharing the years of fun findings, right?
I put a couple of notes for myself and I was like stacking. And then number 3 is ComSpec and you're stealing it. Seriously though, if you look through process image command lines, however you can do that. If you have 4688 event IDs enabled, which is process execution, and you can add the command line on, which hopefully folks have that, or you have an EDR, or as we call it, an XDR at my day job, same thing. No one telling you the marketing I said that. But if you have that and you're able to see, percent ComSpec percent, for anyone who's not familiar, Eric already put it in chat, and just boop, that little guy right there, that environment variable, it points to the command line interpreter, which typically is just simply C Windows System32 command.exe. But threat actors don't want to put in their scripts or whatever their commands, command.exe, because they think that, that's kind of obvious. So they use ComSpec, but so do so many like post-exploitation frameworks. I mean, like you name it. Freaking Cobalt Strike, Brute Ratel does it, Sliver does it, like Posh C2 does it, Empire does it, like you name it. They love to use that ComSpec variable. So if you seriously just look through your command lines run throughout your environment, your process command lines, and you look for ComSpec, you don't even have to put the percentages around it. Just look for COMSPEC. And if you see that, you're like, what are you doing? Like, who's that? And what are you up to right now? But making an alert on that is something that many groups don't do. And so if, hunting there's one side of hunting where you hunt for something bad. And if you find something or you don't find something, you say, well, I'm going to make an alert off this. And that's what people should do. When I was working at that same group, Bechtel, many years ago, I cut my teeth there in a SOC cert environment. And I learned so often, whatever you hunt for, make an alert out of it. And when that alert fires, that's something that you look at. And you have to be very careful to denote whether this is a low fidelity, medium fidelity, or a high fidelity alert, right? You might make an alert that's low fidelity. And you're like, why would I make that as an alert? And like, well, you kind of wouldn't. You would do that as hunting and you would just ongoing check it out. Eric, go.
Right. I know you've kind of danced around this idea, but one of my favorite outputs of threat hunting is the development of baselines. right? It's the best time. It's actually the only way to develop baselines. You're indirectly, when you go to develop a baseline, and let's go back to your services example. When you start baselining services across your environment, I mean, what you're really doing is you're threat hunting. These two things are interchangeable, right? If I'm threat hunting for services that don't belong based on like Ryan's example, rarity or least frequently occurring, right? At the same time, I'm developing a baseline of what is most commonly seen in my environment, and therefore also understanding what is least commonly observed in the environment. But that baseline becomes the basis for future detection, right? Deviations from that baseline, right? Some things are easier to baseline than others. Like services, you could probably wrap your arms around. Process command line, good luck, right? Like there's just too much variability in that. But like things like WMI event consumers, things like that, very, very easily baselined, which can and should be an output of any threat hunt exercise, right? A threat hunt should never come up with, well, I found nothing, so moving on. It's like, no, okay, great, you found nothing, but let's see your baselines and let's develop actionable signatures based on those, right?
Yes, 100%. Another very common thing that I do for hunting, and this is something that it doesn't work well as an alert, because when you set up an alert for your SOC, CERT, security team, Bob and Jane, whoever it is that's actioning these, it has to be something that has higher fidelity. So something that works really well for hunting, but not so much for alerting, is a single character executable. Give me 1 second. I'll drop into chat. My computer restarted, so my Visual Studio Code died. How dare you? Come on. But if you're looking for an executable that matches a regular expression like, oh, you already beat me to it, but damn you, Eric. Something like that, where it's like, something that basically just one character .exe. Ransomware actors they just love it. Advanced persistent threat, for whatever reason, because they're not stupid, I guess. Not that I'm calling ransomware actors stupid, but you see these like cybercrime actors so commonly, like 1.exe, 5.exe, x.exe. They love those. And so looking for those throughout your environment, as a heads up, you will find r.exe, especially for the R programming language, because that's what it distros as. And then m.exe is another very, very common one. You tune those two out and you start looking at things and you get special characters. You'll be like tilde.exe was very, very popular for a long time with shellcode injections that would download things from the internet using the standard Win32 INET libraries. And the reason for that was that the Metasploit framework defaulted to, hey, it's shellcode, so we have to fit it in as little opcodes as possible. And for whatever reason, they defaulted to tilde.exe, whoever's idea that was, but that's great for us because we can look for those things within our environment. And you might think, oh yeah, I'll run that regular expression that Ryan just shared, and I'll look for these little dumb little things. But you'll find in your environment so many. And so it's not high fidelity, but at the same time, it's a really good query to run. And I find it very, very useful.
It's funny, just like hearing you talk about some of these tools just brings me back. So, I used to do a lot of training environments, live ranges and stuff where we're Cobalt Strike all over the place. And one of the things you quickly learn when you actually use some of these tools is you quickly learn their default modes, right? Like, hey, by default, if I move laterally with SMB, I notice that it creates a pseudo-random named service executable on the destination side, so the system I move to. So it's pseudo-random name because it's trying to not be easily, detected. However, it always used a 7-character key space.
Oh, you're talking about Cobalt Strike?
Yeah. So it's like, okay, great. So even though the characters are pseudo-random, I know they're only alphabetic or alphanumeric, and I know it's going to be 7 characters. So there's your regex pattern. And it would also do weird things like the example I posted earlier, where the service binary would be in a UNC path, whack 1 through 7.0.0.1, instead of C:, they're using the UNC path of the local host. It's the weirdest thing in the world. No legitimate service behaves this way, but for whatever reason, these attack tools oftentimes leave these little signatures behind. But you have to know these signatures in order to know how easy they are to detect on and also to hunt for, right?
Yeah, 100%. One of my favorites is Impacket. So if anyone here is not familiar with the Impacket framework, and here I'll type it in the chat just so I spelled it wrong. Impacket. If you're not familiar with that framework, oh my goodness, it's used on so many cybercrime attacks, and it has a bunch of hard-coded values, and those values can be super, super useful to identify within your environment. And these types of tools, there it is. Yeah. These types of tools often will do something that I refer to as environment variable substringing. So threat actors don't want to put like command.exe/c and then whatever command they're running, right? They're just a simple who am I? Because many EDRs will pick that up. They'll be like, oh, someone running who am I? And they've never run that before. If you have like UBA and be like, that's go look at that, right? But many times those can be subverted by substringing. And a substring looks like this. Let me just put this in the chat here. It'll be like percent, what's like a system, and then you'll have like a colon, and then you'll have a number, and then let's just say like 3, like kind of like that. So I popped it into the chat. So you can do analysis on that substringing. And that's one of when I first moved to the managed threat hunting team at Unit 42 at Palo, which is where I work now. That's one of the things that I came up with. I was like, hey, they like to use substringing quite a bit. And if you're interested, here is right in the chat. Boop, there you go. There's a regular expression that I use often. And what they do is they take substrings of environment variables in order to form individual characters. So if they don't want to actually type out CMD, they will take an environment variable that happens to have the letter C in it at position 17, right? Or something like that. And then they will use this methodology. Wait, you're showing Newman. What is that? Does one of our SANS courses cover that? No. Which course is that?
It's Team Medin's 560 class. It's all about Impacket. He's got a whole section on Impacket.
I didn't know he covered that. I didn't know he covered that.
It's in 560.
That's really funny. Yeah. Like a lot of people think that SANS instructors are like, I know every class. Like, no, I don't. I know my class. But seriously, like those substrings, when you look for them and you hunt for them on the command line, you just start to find some amazing stuff. You find Impacket, you find, again, all the same, post exploitation frameworks. It's very, very common. Another thing, I know that we're getting close on time here. Gosh, I could talk for hours on this. Oh my goodness, Eric. Run DLL. Whenever you see a DLL that's executed, or I should say, an export executed from a malicious DLL, it's usually something like run DLL32.exe, DLL location, and then you'll have like a comma, and then the name of the exported function. So like, kind of like that, like what I put it in chat. But you can also refer to exported functions in a DLL via its ordinal, which just refers to the export address list, not the IAT, but the EAT. And I have, give me 1 second. I've got via ordinal.
Is this the concept of like forwarded functions, Ryan, or is this different?
It's different. It's different.
Okay.
So I've got, there you go. So in the chat, I just dropped in, if you hunt for something like that regular expression, I just popped in there, being in the command line, whatever your EDR calls it, right? I can give you the name of our Palo Alto one, but you're like, well, I don't use that. Like, whatever. That's the regular expression, right? So you look for run DLL32 dot whatever, and then whatever's after that, a comma, and then a pound sign or an octothorpe, which is just a really fun name for a pound sign, which it just it makes me giggle every time. You look for that and then a number, some type of number. And if you see that on the command line, why are you doing that? Like most third-party software developers do not say run DLL32 our DLL and then ordinal, 7. Like, what are you doing? So when we see that and when we hunt for that, it's something that can be extremely, well, depending on the client, the tenant, the number of hosts or whatever, can be extremely high fidelity. And it's something that I love to look for, because when you see run DLL, and for the folks who aren't aware, run DLL 32, when you invoke it via the command line, you give a DLL name, a comma, and then the exported function name. It's as simple as that, right? I think I mentioned that before. But when you have a comma and then a pound sign and then a number, it's mostly malware that does that. Mostly malware. And it's because the developers, they don't want to put an ordinal or a number. They're just going to put the name of the function, the exported function. And so it's something that I find as a pretty good way to identify things that are doing something silly within your environment. And let's see, we talked about stacking with services and tasks, for example, single character executions. Eric, you jumped out ahead of me and got the com spec. I love com spec so much. Oh my gosh. Environment variable substringing, run DLL via ordinals. These types of hunts are things that in some environments may come out with, thousands of results. And then in other environments will come out with a single result. And you're like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what's that guy right there? And that's one of my favorite things about hunting, is that whatever system you're using, you're probably going to export your data. It's probably going to export into a CSV. You're probably going to open it in Excel. And when it comes down to threat hunting, like if you asked, what's the best threat hunting tool you've ever used, ever? I'm like, Excel. It's Excel. I'll be honest. Or you're using some weird, Sigma rules. Yeah, but then I export it to Excel. So with the few minutes we have left, the one thing that I want to mention is if you look up on Twitter, 100 days of Sigma, I believe that's the hashtag. There are a number of people who push these Sigma rules. And if you've never heard of Sigma, or if you're not familiar with like someone like Florian Roth in the blue space side of, the things in our realm, they push out these Sigma rules, which are a universal rule set that provides, or that has with it, a converter that can convert to whatever SIM or whatever system you're using. Hopefully, if it's a big name commercial one or a big name open source one. And if you look these rules up and you just pull from the rules, like, well, okay, they're looking at the process command line. They're looking for /t/v reg.exe add and then a 0 at the end or something like that. Just apply that to whatever the heck you use. And it's an amazing way to hunt throughout your environment. Like, I highly recommend even just a hashtag Sigma on Twitter. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not Twitter anymore. What's it called? X.
It's Twitter. It's Twitter.
It's Twitter. X. But it's looking Twitter those up and seeing those rules can be very, very, very useful. And just adapting to whatever the heck it is that you use. And so I think I'll digress there for time. I can go on for hours, but I'll shush.
Dude, no, this is a fire topic, and we went right up to the minute, so well done. Matter of fact, I think my favorite takeaway from this call is the substringing. I'll be honest, that's not a technique that I was familiar with. The environment variable substringing, like that is so freaking clever, right? Like I can completely bypass your basic string detection by just concatenating independent, characters from environmental variables by grabbing them by their character position. That's nuts, man. That's a new one to me. So thanks, Ryan. It's always awesome to chat with you. I'm always learning new things from you, man. Really appreciate your insights and experiences. And so for anybody that doesn't already know, you can join our Slack channel at slack.limacharlie.io. You absolutely should, because there's a Defender Fridays channel in there where we like to drop some of the links. But that's also where we're going to call out one weekly winner of the Defender Fridays t-shirt. We give out one every week to a random person that joins us. But you have to be present in Slack to win. So definitely join our Slack channel. Keep the conversation going throughout, from Friday to Friday. Ryan, thanks so much again for joining us. Take care.